Hello, this is Lawrence Romanosky from Calgary, Canada, and I wanted to do a video or videos on these old Land Rovers which have followed me home, and I wanted to do the video on restoring them and showing them since I have a few of them here, five chassis in all, and in different states of restoration and so on. I thought I'd show you the different trucks, what to look for, what they look like when they're taken apart, the problem areas, and generally speaking, how you would go about restoring one, or passing on some of the information that I've learned over the years. Okay, so let's turn this camera around, and we'll start to look at some of these trucks. Okay, so here are the vehicles in this horde that I've collected. They're all mid-60s Series 2A Land Rovers, and we can go through these. But let's say that you want to start a Land Rover restoration. If you're really lucky, what you're going to find is a vehicle that would have, its original paint, maybe like this one. You might find a vehicle with desirable specification, the safari roof, the deluxe bonnet. You might find a vehicle that has a unrusty rear cross member. You might find a vehicle with a completely original interior that hasn't been modified, like this one, never modified. Okay, so if you're lucky, you'll find a Rover with a completely unrusted frame that's never been modified. You'll find body panels that are have the original paint on them and that are all in good shape and it's never been crunched. You'll find one with the interior intact and all original and under the hood as well. Okay, if you find one like that, let me know, because you don't normally. You might find one vehicle that might be unrusty, but then has significant frame damage and modifications. You might have a vehicle with some good panels that are undented and not drilled and so on, and then you look at the bulkhead and it's completely shot. You could look at you might look under the hood, and you'll probably find something like this, which is an American carburetor and alternator with the other parts long gone. Okay, you might find a Rover like in the spec you want, like this blue one, but then you find out that it's got quite a bit of filler in it, and the rear box is wavy and so on. And you might find one where the aluminum rear box isn't dented from guys throwing stuff in it, but generally they've all led a tough life. You might find one with all the original lighting, but more often than not, this one's been repaired, but more often than not you'll see some different lights lit in the car. Okay, so if you can find a Rover that checks all those boxes, it's a fantastic start. Generally you can't. And even if you did, it would probably be expensive because they're now starting to be collectible. Okay, so then what you wind up doing, and that's what most Rover guys wind up doing, is they wind up having a horde of them. Our little girl Autumn. And you wind up trying to pick one to start with, and then maybe mixing and matching parts from various vehicles, and you find one where you want to start that would maybe have the chassis and the bulkhead that you want, and then maybe piece together kind of all the best panels from what you have. That's generally the way most guys do it. Now, when you do that, you're going to find you're going to pick one that's the steel is in good shape, the body and the bulkhead are in good shape, and then you're going to start with that and then disassemble the vehicle. Okay, so you just get your Whitworth sockets generally, and then just go to town, and 40 hours later you just unbolt every piece and start stripping it down until you get the chassis. You take the suspension off, the engine out, and then everything's apart, and then start there. Okay, so when you do that, what you are going to wind up with, just forgive me here for this short walk, you're going to wind up with a naked chassis that looks like this. Okay, so this one, I'm going to splice in what it looked like before. But it was all sandblasted, cleaned up, repaired, and we did quite a bit of work to this. The front horns are pretty badly damaged. Some guy augured bored circular apertures through the side members of the outriggers for a snowplow attachment. The bulkhead, that actually came from a different Rover, and I can show you what that looked like before. So we pieced together parts and cleaned everything up and got it here. Okay, so you can see all the work on the bulkhead, and there is the new floors and repairs, and you can see that this one in particular had new footwells, and the posts always needed a little bit of work too. Okay. This car also had significant work done to the rear cross members. This is basically all new metal in there. So you'll get to this point, then decide what to do. You can paint the chassis. That's the way they were done originally, but more often than not, it makes sense to galvanize it first, and because you get the protection inside and out. So we'll send it to the galvanized, hot dip galvanizing place, and then it'll come back looking like this bumper, and that's the same as a fence, right? The same process. So that makes sense to do. The seat box, you'll see, we've taken all that apart and stripped it, and we've made a new battery box for it. That's steel in this case. This is aluminum, but that's steel. So we had to make all that from new. We had to take all the doors apart, sandblast all the doors. This one was okay. You just needed a little bit of metal let in. This one was not okay. It needed the whole bottom rail, some other parts, and also we needed to reskin it. So that's a new aluminum skin. You can buy a lot of the repair panel sections, like the footwells. You can buy them galvanized and then just weld them in. Of course, you need to be careful because they're galvanized. These ones we just fabricated. You can buy a new cross member. Again, Rover's North is probably the best source, and then have it weld on. Or you can just repair the pieces. You can buy new doors, etc. You just have to be careful because, some of the parts, they do the best they can and find the best suppliers they can. But sometimes that's in China, and the parts are not of the same quality, and there's problems with them and stuff. So you need to be a little bit careful about which parts you buy, and you're really better off sticking to the established firms like Rover's North, or I use SC Spares in England as well, and we're in Canada just because they've done it enough times that they've managed to weed out the bad suppliers. Okay, so then you get this far, you galvanize the chassis, and you can galvanize the bulkhead, but the galvanizing, it's a hot dip galvanizing. It's I think 800 degrees. It'll warp it a little bit, so you might have some trouble putting it back in the chassis without a bunch of work, and the parcel shelf will generally deform a little bit and need some metal work. So we galvanized the bulkhead on the Blue Rover. And it was actually quite a bit of work to put in, but I'd still kind of rather do that because now I've got, the zinc coating on the inside of the panels as well. Okay, so you got that, and then with the aluminum, that all needs to be sent out, cleaned up, stripped. It's a Burma Bright alloy. We'll go back to these cars now. So it's a Burma Bright alloy, not different than this, it's different than that. And the Burma Bright alloy has a high magnesium content in it, and it's brittle, and you can't work it, okay? So you can fill it, you can leave the dent alone, You know, you can put filler in it and smooth it over. You can just leave the dent because it's a Land Rover, and you know, some people don't mind that. Or you can make a new skin like we did with the door. It goes without saying that having at least one Rover with good panels makes your job a whole lot easier. When you start getting into like this rear box we're going to use on that vehicle and the trailer, and it's pretty good. It doesn't have much wrong with it, except, you know, there'll always be something. You'll see it's just crunched in the corner, and so we'll have to try to figure that out. And also, you know, the aluminum, it won't rust, but you know, you can see that when it comes in contact with the steel, the electrolytic corrosion will basically just dissolve it. And this is another example on the doors as well. The aluminum's in great shape. It's not dented, but you know, where the steel frame meets the aluminum skin, you know, you can see in parts where it's totally eaten away. And so oftentimes you don't really realize the extent of the corrosion until you really pull the whole thing apart. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, it means, like I said again, start with a bunch of them if you're, you know, unless you're really fortunate and you find like a perfectly preserved example, and then go through basically an inventory of what you have, and you know, get the major pieces out of the way. You know, the frame and the bulkhead and so on, and get that, and then just go through all the minor pieces, like you know, which pieces are you going to use for, you know, the seat and the seat box. They can look pretty decent until you get them to the sandblaster, or until you start stripping them, and then you find stuff like you'd normally look at that and think, oh well, it looks great, it's all solid, but there'll be, you know, a place in it that isn't good. You know, you can look at this and think it's fine, but then when you strip it, you might find that there's not much there except paint. And so you need to, when you take these things apart, then you need to sort of categorize them, and then there are subtle differences, you know, between vehicles, so you need to be careful. Most of the time, all the parts you can swap, but sometimes you can't. You can, for instance, you know, this is, you know, a later Series 2A bug eye. It has a later heater. It has seat belts in it, which meant that they have to curve the handbrake up so you could reach it. So it's got a later handbrake. The steering wheel is a little bit different. The wiper motor lives under there, and then there's a gearbox to supply the power to the two arms, and that's different than this Rover here, which is an earlier one. That's a bug eye, by the way. They have different lighting arrangements. They just made that for, I think, just 1 year. As a transition between two lights on the grille panel to the Series 3 lights where you have the recessed panel and the lights were on the wings. So I was going to show you what the earlier Rovers look like. You know, they have a sprung steering wheel. They have different mechanism for the vent flaps. They have 2 individual wiper motors, and so on. So there's all sorts of little differences that might catch you out. So you want to make sure that when you're piecing together these Rovers, that it's all actually going to fit together. And you might start with, you know, a Rover like this, and then it's pretty good. This is the best one that I have, but then notice that, you know, there's a lot of filler in one fender, but then go to one of these other Rovers and okay, well, it's got a good outer piece. So then you take this one off and you can substitute that piece. And this one, you know, has a couple of dents in it, and the other one doesn't. So you might swap the bonnet. People are not too many Rover people care about matching numbers. It's not like it's a Porsche 356. So in fact, if you can find a later engine from a Series 3 with a fully synchro mesh gearbox, you know, that's probably worth more than one of the earlier ones. And you know, you'll get to the engine and you'll see, well, it's got an aftermarket alternator, it's got a different carburetor, it's got this, it's got that. And then you'll try to, you know, assemble as much good pieces as you can. The wheels, later ones are 15 inches. The earlier ones are 16. So you'll want to maybe get a set of the 16s because they're more desirable. And you'll go through each panel and you'll find, some of them have holes come in and some of them don't. A door top, this one's rusted, but you maybe find another door top, etc. So I think that's fairly clear as a process. They're easy to take apart. They're easy to accumulate. It's easy to have a garage or a backyard filled with dead cars. All that's easy, and then it gets hard. And then it gets hard when you start having to pay people $100 an hour to do specialized work, metal work, aluminum work, etc. And the parts, they're not ridiculous, but they're not cheap either. And so, you can't, people think that, well, maybe there's such a simple vehicle, they don't cost that much to restore. But, anytime you're taking something like that, stripping it down to that stage, the number of hours involved is substantial. And I would say that you're looking at, to do a proper ground up, that there's at least 500 hours worth of work. And then, you got to pay for paint, and you got to pay for galvanizing, and you have to pay for all the bolts to be recoated and stuff like that. And, pay for all the serviceable items and so on, replacement. You probably need to buy a new starter and alternator or generator, and a bunch of the distributor, carburetor, etc. Rather than rebuilding the old ones, just because it's just there's not too many people who will do it. You'll wind up with a bucket full of assorted fasteners and so on, and generally you take all that and get that plated. That might be $500 or $600 or $700 to do that. And then you'll wind up with all these parts here, which will all need to be individually cleaned up, either bead blasted or use chemical stripper with a wire brush, and then filled and painted. Buckets of some of the assemblies you might be able to use a water vapor to clean up. Other stuff needs to get bead blasted and then straightened and painted and so on. And then you've got to get into the axles and rebuild everything and so on. So it's it's I guess the same as any ground up restoration. There's some things that are really easy about it, like they're so easy to take apart and put back together, which makes them ideal restorations for somebody who wants to contract the work themselves, or wants to be involved with it, or wants to take over the kind of the fun bits of putting all the shiny stuff together. So they're great vehicles for that, and you don't deal with a lot of really, the steel frame and aluminum door skins and so on, that is complicated. It's highly specialized work. It might as well be an Aston Martin or something like that. But generally, unbolting stuff and bolting stuff back together, you can do a good portion of the work yourself. Although, the specialist tasks might be outside your expertise. So they're great in that respect, and they're somehow they're very, it's such a nuts and boltsy kind of a car, and there's a lot of satisfaction to doing it. If you just give it to a restoration shop, it's not going to be cheaper than anything else. You'll get a bill for $70,000 or $80,000 or $100,000 by the time you're done, just because you're paying. It's going to take them 500 or 600 or 700 hours, and then you'll pay $20,000 or $30,000, $40,000 worth of parts. There's no way you're going to escape that. And those shops aren't getting rich, right? They just try to charge for every hour, and they don't. But anyway, I hope that is informative. I guess the takeaways are probably start with as many good Rovers as you can, and look for ones that have good parts. Do your best with that. Try not to get your spouse mad at you with filling up your yard with dead cars. And then take the time to inventory what you have, and make sure that you can build the truck with the parts you had in mind, and there's no subtle differences to them. And then honestly assess how much time you have personally to do this, and then how much money you want to spend. Once you take them apart, there's kind of no going back. So you may decide you just want to refurbish one and keep it running. And of course, it's a lot cheaper just to buy one that somebody else has done. Although it's very rare that you see the really thorough, good quality work that's really detail oriented, where they've used the right parts and coatings and stuff, is really rare. And if you do find those vehicles, they're very expensive. So there's kind of no free lunch. It's all about how much work you put into it. So hope that was helpful. Lawrence Romanosky from Calgary, Canada. And good luck with your Land Rover restoration. Thanks. Bye.